Today we have on a pretty special guest. This is actually the first guest I've really kind of interviewed outside of my friends. So I kind of know Ashley a little bit, but I mean, a little bit intimidated by her resume. I mean, holy cow, she's got 57 fastest known times, aka FKTs. Absolutely incredible. She's got the FKT for women on the JMT. Whole bunch of these other routes, Lost Coast Trail. I mean, she is a badass woman, and I was thankful to interview her. So let's dive into it. We got a bunch of stories here, and especially if you're into FKTs and pushing yourself, this is going to be some good stuff. Okay, well, we have Ashley Winchester here, and Ashley, I just got to say, the way I found you, by the way, as I'm starting this podcast, the way I actually found you was hearing that you crushed the JMT FKT. That's how I actually heard about you. And so if you're not opposed, I would love to jump into that right away. I want to know, just for myself, all about this JMT FKT.
just jumping right into it.
Just jumping right in. Yep.
Yeah, I love talking about the John Muir Trail. It's one of my favorite trails in the whole entire world, and I love the Sierras, so I'm always happy to talk about the JMT. And that's that's a trail, a route, an FKT backpacking experience that I hold very near and dear to my heart, and so happy to talk about it.
Now, so when I did the John Muir Trail, it was incredibly difficult. I went northbound out of Cottonwood Pass, and it was way harder than I thought. For whatever reason, I thought it was kind of a family trail or something. I don't know why I thought about this. But it's one of the most isolated trails, I would say, kind of in the U.S. Like, you don't cross a road for forever. So where did you go? Did you start in Yosemite and then go to Whitney, or Whitney to Yosemite? And how did that all go? Plan out?
Yeah, so I went southbound from Happy Isles, which is like the official start of the John Muir Trail, to Mount Whitney, and then of course Whitney Portal, because the summit of Mount Whitney is the official end of the trail. But then you still have to get yourself down from there, right? Yeah. To the trailhead.
Yeah.
So I went southbound. The way it all came about, so I actually backpacked the JMT over 16 days, so a bit like leisurely-ish. Like some people take 21 days, some people take like 14 days. So I was like right around 16 days with my friend in 2019. And we did it, actually, 2019 was kind of an epic snow year for the Sierras.
It was.
And this year is actually like, it looks like they might end up beating 2019 out with the snow levels, but
wow.
Kind of an epic snow year. My friend and I started early July, and it was quite the adventure. Like super snowy, like more than 50% of the trail was under snow. There weren't a lot of people on the trail. So it was, like there was no trail to follow in some spots. We were just route finding with our GPS, and lots of people bailing out. Going up and over the passes was like, man, I wish I had my ice axe. They were sketchy. Super high river crossings. I mean, it was a pretty wild adventure just backpacking it in 2019. And like, it is a hard trail. So on top of that, the elevation gain and loss is insane. And you're at high elevations, like you're above 9,000 feet pretty much the entire time. Once you get out of Yosemite Valley. So it's not an easy trail. But in 2019, after backpacking it, I was like, man, I'd really like to fast pack this in like under 7 days. And the FKT, well, at the time, like I knew of FKTs. I hadn't started my little FKT journey yet, but I knew of FKTs, and I was like, I don't think I can get the FKT on this route, but I'd like to do it in under 7 days. And so that has always kind of stuck with me ever since I did that kind of more leisurely, quote unquote, backpacking trip in 2019. And then in 2021, I went ahead and I put in for a permit for the JMT I wanted to go southbound, starting at Happy Isles. And if you're familiar with the JMT, which I'm assuming you are, but I don't know about your listeners, it's really hard to get a permit out of Happy Isles, out of Yosemite Valley. Um, Not just to like start the JMT, but then I needed a special permit to pass through Little Yosemite Valley, which is up the trail like 8 miles or something, and exit over Donahue Pass. And so it was like a very specific um, permit that I needed to get. And I actually, in 2021, I got the permit, and it was for like early September. I was like, great. There's like, low river crossings. Like the weather is usually a little bit more mild as far as like the afternoon thunderstorms. Fantastic. Well, I got shut down like the week before I was supposed to start. I got shut
Oh
down by
man.
wildfire. And so I was heartbroken, right? Like I'd had this plan since 2019 of this idea that I was gonna go for sub 7 day JMT fast pack. And then this last year, actually 2022, put in for permits, never got them. And I was kind of like, well, okay, that's fine. At the beginning of last year, I actually was on this crazy trip down in Argentina. I was guiding on Aconcagua, which is a almost 23,000 foot peak in
Yes.
Argentina. And the whole entire team ended up getting COVID at 18,000 feet at Camp 2. And I was coughing so hard that I actually like injured my ribs, and I recovered from that. And then I got COVID again, and then I got flu. It was just like this crazy, like months of being sick and injured. And so I was kind of like, maybe it's not a great idea that I do the
Wow.
JMT this year. Right. But then, so come July of last year, I was in Yosemite, and I just randomly was like, I wonder if there's any permits available for the JMT. Just curious, like go on the recreation.gov, check, and there's a permit for a week from that day. The exact permit that I need from Happy Isle, Little Yosemite Pass through, exit over Donahue Pass. And I was like, I got excited, and I just like grabbed the permit, paid for it, and was like, here we go. And then I like full on panicked because I didn't actually end up training for the John Muir Trail. Like I guided a couple of 3-day backpacking trips here and there. And then it was like, okay, my running was really poor. I think the highest mileage week that I had before starting the John Muir Trail was like 30 miles, and it was the week before starting the trail. So I was like, I am not trained for this. I was fully ready to like bail out at any point. And I was like, okay, but I have to try. Like, I just feel like I need to do this. Right. And so I guided a 3-day backpacking trip in that week before starting the John Muir Trail. And then I had like 2 days to prep. And so I just like threw together my favorite gear, my favorite snacks, my favorite foods, and tried to go as light as possible. And I was suddenly at the trailhead and starting my very long walk.
Unbelievable. I don't know if people caught that, but you literally just did this FKT with no training, randomly selected, got a permit that was like happened to be there,
Yeah.
just boom, jump, but knowing that you weren't fully trained for it or that you weren't trained exactly maybe the way that you would like to do it, you were just like,
Yes.
I need to take this opportunity.
Yep. That's exactly it. I was like, I don't know, like, when am I going to get this opportunity again? Those permits are so hard to
Yeah,
come by.
yeah,
And so I was just kind of like, all right, we're doing this, and we're going to just see what happens. And so I definitely, like, I always have emergency plans in place. So I wasn't going into it with
yeah,
this idea that like, I have no out. Like I always have, I'm very I'm actually very risk avert. Like I don't
sure.
take a lot of risks. And so that part, like that's very calculated for me. So I wasn't, I just want to make it clear, like I wasn't like throwing myself into this kind of going like, well, if things go awry, like I'm screwed. It was, that was very calculated. But it definitely was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the FKT on this. And I actually planned for 7 days on the JMT. So I had, and you have to carry a bear canister. So I rented one of those like carbon fiber bear canisters. And I actually did get checked by a ranger. So it is important to carry those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I rented a bear canister, a like super lightweight one, and packed 7 days worth of food as a like just in case. Um, and then I had like my eagle, my beagle, and my seagull. My eagle would have been like, 4 days would have been like the perfect, like, this is, if I was in great shape and, had tons of planning and was able to like get this thing, you know, 4 days would have been ideal. From there, it was like 5 to 6 days was kind of my beagle. And then my seagull was like, the original, like, let's do this thing in under 7. Um, and so I was ready for 7 days out on the trail.
Unreal. Let me ask you this. So you had a good kind of soft plan coming in, at least with days that you wanted to complete it. Do you do any type of like visualization of that prior to going out on the trail? Do you do any of that?
They're like, yeah. I mean, I like to, because I am a planner and I don't like taking risks, I do envision like what are the things that can go wrong and how am I going to like get through those.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think about like dehydration and I think about like running out of food and I think about freezing to death. I think about storms. And I do kind of in like think about those things and envision what would I do in those situations. And so I actually
Love it.
go into it fairly ready to take
Mm-hmm.
on those kind of adversities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't, as much as I like to think about like what it would feel like to finish and like, get the end and like have that, celebratory thing, like it feels good to envision those things, and it feels good to envision things going really well for you.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also feel like if you're envisioning, the end and you're getting those like warm fuzzy feelings of like finishing it, well then in your mind, like your body is already like feels like it's finished, like I've already celebrated, like that you can actually like create those feelings within the body. And so when you're in it and you're envisioning that end, it actually makes it harder to get through, I think, some kinds of adversity and like, getting over those speed bumps and all the things that go wrong, because things do go wrong out there. Like, so
I always say ultra running and any backpacking, anything like that it's like advanced problem solving. You have to be like a
yeah,
really, really good problem solver.
it's one of my favorite things about backpacking actually is
Hmm.
that problem solving. And that's one of the things I love about guiding backpacking trips, is because I can teach some of that problem solving too.
Hmm.
um, and that's what I love about wilderness medicine. It's like there's
Hmm.
it's like puzzles that you can like sort of put together and figure out, and I love that.
It really
um,
is.
yeah.
We talked about you talked about being risk adverse. I think a lot of people that are outside of the outdoor community sometimes they see individuals that do the JMT, do an FKT, do rock climbing, do this or that, and they assume that we're very risky individuals.
Yeah.
Extremely risky. I used to hear this at my old job all the time. Wow,
Yep.
why don't you just stay home for the weekend? Why don't you do this and that? Have you ever experienced any of that kind of talk before? And what's maybe your response to that?
Oh,
People say,
absolutely. I think everybody who does anything in the outdoors gets that kind of talk sometimes. I mean, even people who are just day hiking, like, oh, you went up there, that's dangerous, or like you went alone, that's dangerous. Like, why would you do that? What? But like, my response is one, why wouldn't I do something that makes me feel alive? Like, it is. I love being outdoors so much. I love being alone, solo in the wilderness
mm-hmm,
so much. I love like all of the things, even the problems that pop up. I love those things so much and they make me feel so alive and make me feel more myself than I am in any other situation. Why would I stop doing that? Um, like yes, there is risk involved, but there's risk involved whenever you get into your car and drive across town. Like it's just part of life. Like
Mhm.
there is risk in everything we do. And if I decided to stay home and be safe, then what am I'm risking, like being unhealthy, having an unhealthy body.
Ooh.
I'm risking health problems in the future. It's like there's all of these things that, like, and sure I could exercise at home, but then I don't feel alive. Like
Mhm.
there's there's just so much wrapped up into that. And I don't know. I don't I don't find it useful engaging in those kinds of conversations with people, especially if they're like, wagging their finger at me and, telling me that I'm going to use up resources or whatever. I mean, humans, we are animals and we thrive when we're outdoors.
Mhm.
And we need that in our lives. And I
Mhm.
need that in my life. I know I need that in order to be a happy, healthy person. So I'm just not going to stop.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's a great response. That's probably what I'll title the podcast, I think. The Why wouldn't I want to do something that makes me feel alive? I love that.
Yeah.
And I think people also they underestimate the amount of training and stuff that we do on a continual basis to be fit in the mountains. Like you before we started recording the podcast, Ashley's like, "Oh yeah, I just, I don't have much going on this afternoon except for I'm going to go to the gym and got to do a run." So it's like we're prioritizing that every single day, and like we're also prioritizing education outside of that too, because I'm sure that I mean, well, first of all, you kind of alluded to this, but you're also a guide.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a backpacking guide. I also guide on Mount Shasta in Northern California, which is a 14,000-foot peak with some technical aspects to it. And yeah, risk is part of my job. It's also something I've been trained to
Mhm.
recognize and see. And I think the more time you spend outdoors, the more time that you put into the education of, learning how to read terrain and stuff like that, it actually becomes safer. I've taken avalanche courses and wilderness medicine courses, and there is, mountaineering courses, and I'm actually going to further my education and take more alpine mountaineering guiding courses. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of education involved in it, and the more the safer you can be and the better decisions you can make.
Ooh, mic drop right there. I always think back to rock climbing. I remember when I started bouldering, there was a guy in the gym that used to rope climb quite a bit, and he kept trying to get me to go outside and rock climb. And I was just like, I'm good, dude. Like, maybe a bucket list thing, but like, I'm good. Like, I don't want to take on that risk, whatever. But I ended up going with him and just like learning more stuff about it. And as I started to learn more of the nuances of it and the safety mechanisms and the double checks and the triple checks and all of that type of stuff, I was like, oh, you can actually make this very, very safe. But to an
Yeah.
outside person, it's you're on a wall with a rope that could break, that could, this or that, and they could drop you. And so yeah, so you're absolutely right. I totally agree with the more education, the more safer you can make it. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And, well, when I started rock climbing, I started on outdoor rock and on, like, I think the first climb I ever did was like a 50-foot pitch, and it was terrifying. And my friend that I went with was like, just trust the rope, trust the rope, trust the rope.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, this little rope, like, how am I supposed to trust this thing?
Yes.
And I didn't trust it until I fell on it. And
Mhm.
then I was like, oh, this thing really works. And these knots actually work. And the more I learned about it and played with it, the more I realized that, like, oh, this actually can be very safe. It can be very dangerous. Like, obviously people die and get
Mhm.
injured rock climbing and,
Mhm.
doing outdoor things. But yeah, the more and the better practices that you put in place, like, the safer it actually is.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Going back to the JMT real quick.
Yeah.
We got a little sidetracked, but that was my fault.
A
But
little bit.
hey, we had some good conversations there.
Yeah, there's good stuff there.
So going back to the JMT real quick, you talked about the JMT being a very tough trail, and it is a very tough trail. I don't think a lot of people know that. Just like you said, you're above 9,000 feet for pretty much the entire trail. I
Yeah.
mean, you're just in the alpine the entire time almost. I mean, and typically what it looks like is you go up, you do a pass, you come back down into the valley, you go up to a pass, you go down into the valley, but you're still at like over 9,000 feet. What was that FKT? Okay, how would you contrast your FKT versus the leisurely backpack that you had of the 16 days? Like what were the main differences that you found?
Well, when I did the FKT, I I wasn't in really good running shape, and I had like a, I don't know, 12 pounds on my back or something. And so there wasn't actually a lot of running during that FKT. I did jog out a bit on the very last day, which was weird, because I was so sleep deprived. But that was like the biggest difference there. It was that when I backpacked it in 16 days, we hiked our planned mileage for the day. We set up camp. It was still light outside. We got good sleep every single night. We ate really, really well. And, we had a resupply. It was like very pretty comfortable backpacking, like comfortable tent and comfortable pad. Except for on that trip, my pad kept deflating in the
Yeah. Yeah.
in the middle of the night, and I didn't have anything to fix it. So that
Oh
was like
no.
one big lesson I had there. But when I did the FKT on it, I actually hardly slept. Like maybe, I think I got maybe 6 hours of sleep for the whole 6 days that I was out there. Um,
Let me hold on. Let me stop right there. You got 6 hours of sleep in six. You're averaging 1 hour of sleep for 6 days, and
yeah.
that's moving your body the entire time.
I was trying to move my body the whole time. It was so hot. I really struggled with dehydration and some electrolyte problems during the FKT, that slowed me down like crazy. And then because of the heat and the sweat, my feet just like blew up with blisters. It was nuts. And like all of my tried and true blister care stuff just like wasn't really cutting it. So after day one, I actually like made really good progress in the first 24 hours of the FKT. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I can keep this up, I'm going to do it in like 4.5 days. And I was so excited. But then like, the second 24 hours rolls around. When I started the FKT at Happy Isle in Yosemite Valley, there was a big fire nearby. And so everything was just like super smoky. All of Yosemite was like just so smoky. And I started coughing within the first couple of hours of being out on trail. And I actually was like, well, maybe this might be dangerous. Like maybe I should
Yeah.
consider bailing.
Hmm.
And I'm just like start off the first 24 hours with this horrible cough. Well, I went up and over Donahue Pass, and the next morning was like totally clear outside. I mean, like no smoke. And I was like, great, it's on. And but then I had this like lingering cough, and I started coughing stuff up. Just like, really productive cough. It was super painful. And I again was like, well, maybe I shouldn't keep pushing. Maybe I should just kind of like either go slow and take it easy, and like give up on the FKT, or like bail out. But I didn't feel that bad, and I wasn't having any breathing problems at elevation. So I was like, okay, if it's just a slightly productive cough, I'm going to keep pushing. But that slowed me down a bit too, going into day two. And but the biggest thing was the sleep deprivation for me, because I was hardly sleeping. So my initial plan going into it was I was going to move for 20 hours and then sleep for 4, or like rest for 4 hours. So 20 hours of like solid movement, 4 hours of rest. Well, after the first day, like the first daylight hour, um, if that makes sense. I started the FKT at like 10 a.m. And so I think I laid down for my 4 hour sleep at like 2 a.m. or something like that. And then just like couldn't sleep. And so I was tossing and turning. Like my muscles were already kind of achy and my hips were kind of achy, and I'm laying on a Z pad. So it's not like super cushy. So in the first 4 hours that I tried to lay down, I got maybe like 2 hours of rest. And after that, I was like, man, maybe it's not worth trying to sleep for 4 hours straight. Like maybe I should try and spread out my sleep throughout the day so that I'm just like, so I can actually sleep when I'm supposed to sleep. And so from then on, I pretty much would just, I think on the second night, I laid down for like 2 hours, slept for maybe an hour of that. And from there on, I was just like, okay, when I get so tired that I can't walk in a straight line anymore, I'm going to sit down, take a nap, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I'm going to get up and keep going. Because I found like 20 to 30 minutes was the amount of time that I actually could be like comfortable and asleep. And then from there, it was like, oh, my hips ache, or, like my back hurts or something. So I'm just like, then I'm just tossing and turning. So I actually would just sit down, lay down, put my feet up on a rock or a tree, and like elevate my feet, and then pass out for 20 minutes and then wake up feeling refreshed and keep going.
I
So
was gonna,
that's,
I was, yeah, I was gonna ask, how did you feel pretty good after that hour of sleep ish?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, relatively like an hour is, you're still tired. You just want to rest. I mean, even if you're like laying in your bed and you sleep for a solid hour, that's a great nap, but it's not a sleep.
Hmm.
So it definitely like, it was always hard to get up and get moving. It was always, difficult to get my mind into the sort of the right frame of mind to like know that I have days of this ahead of me.
Hmm.
And, it's not just one night of bad sleep, it's like consecutive nights of bad sleep. And that really adds up over time. And I've had sleep deprivation in the past of like 2 to 3 days, but never 5 days or 6 days. And
Hmm.
so, going into that 4 or 5, 6 days, that was a little bit of an experiment for me.
Unbelievable.
But I mean, to answer your question, yes, I did. So I would feel pretty refreshed after a 20 to 30 minute nap.
Well, that's unbelievable. Very, very well. I guess you surprised yourself maybe
I
with the sleep
did.
deprivation on this FKT.
Yeah. Well, so I knew that sleep deprivation was going to be a thing for me because I'm not really like a very fast runner or a like very fast hiker, but I can just keep moving forever.
Hmm.
And so I knew that that was going to be my superpower kind of going into this. And I knew that speed wasn't going to be the thing that got me through this. It was going to be just
Yeah.
consistency. And so, um, I knew going into it that sleep deprivation was going to be an issue. And, things get really wild when you're sleep deprived, like hallucinations and just your mind plays so many weird tricks on you.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I was prepared for that going into it.
Yeah. That's a common theme I hear from people is that, and that's how I view myself as well, as I'm not very fast. I'm not like extremely athletic, that all that type of stuff. But what I like to do and what I feel like I'm pretty good at is being consistent, like constant forward progress, CFP.
Yeah.
Andrew Skirka talks about is, yeah, CFP. And I feel like everybody's asked, how do you run 100 miles and how do you do this or that or how do you do an FKT? And it's constantly going forward,
Yeah.
constantly going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Relentless. Yes.
Relentless forward progress. Yes.
Yeah.
Was there anything, I mean, because I mean, you're pretty much doing the bulk of your hiking at night or running, hiking at night. Was there anything, I mean, I guarantee you had some hallucinations and things like that. Was there
Oh
any
yeah.
actually, like, was there any real animals you were seeing at night more so? Was there any creepy instances like that? You were probably scaring the crap out of some hikers when you were going past them. They're camping and
I
headlamp.
I tried to be really aware of the tents that were out there at night. I mean, yes, I have a bright headlamp, but I don't think that I bothered too many hikers at night. There was actually one instance, and I kind of felt bad about this at the very, very last night. I was at Guitar Lake, so like
Hmm.
just below Mount Whitney.
Yeah.
And there's like a lot of camping along there. A lot of people camp there and then some at Mount Whitney the next day. Um, and I was walking through there at like 2 a.m. and there was this tent. Well, first of all, I was having that by that time. It was like so, I was so sleep deprived. I was having trouble telling the difference between like a big rock and a tent. So I thought big rocks were tents, and then I'd get up
Hmm.
close to it and be like, "Oh no, that's a rock." Like after like really looking at
Hmm.
it. But when I did see tents, I was kind of relieved because I was like, "Okay, there's other people here that makes me feel kind of good."
For sure.
But there was one tent that was like right next to the trail, and I it had these like reflective bits on it right at the tent flap in the front, and there was a slight breeze, and the way the flap was moving with these two little slits, I swear I thought it was like a mountain lion that was like kind of crouching and like looking at me out of the grass.
Yeah.
And so I stopped dead in my tracks, and I'm like staring at this, and I like clap my hands and yell at it, and it's like still just kind of like doing this weird little movement, and I'm like, what the heck? Oh my gosh, this cat's gonna attack me. And I'm like looking around, there's no people. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like this is what people are afraid of, and it's happening. And so I actually pull out both of my headlamps, and I'm like shining this light,
Mhm.
and I realize like, and I start kind of like looking at it going, well, that's really weird. It's like actually like moving strangely now. I thought it was moving
Yeah.
cat like. And then I get a little bit closer. It was a tent. And I felt so bad because I'm like yelling at it. Like shining lights directly on it. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
They're in there. What is going on out
I
there?
know. They
Oh,
probably
no.
thought some
Yeah.
crazy person was
Yeah.
like,
Last thing they're thinking is someone their last day of the FKT that's
yeah.
like coming bumming around through camp.
I know. I would love it if they were actually like
Gosh.
listen to this podcast and reached out, because
Oh,
I'm sure they were in there going like, just be
yes.
quiet, like don't move, don't say anything. Maybe she'll go
Yes.
away.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
But as far as like real animal encounters, I did hallucinate animals quite a bit, but
Yeah.
I have uh, like my mind is really good at like being very rational, and so for the hallucinations, I'd see this like bear or something that I was hallucinating, and I'd look at it and go, well, it's not moving. Like my
Uh,
hallucinations don't move. Like they are very stationary. They're like you know, models or whatever. Like
hmm.
they don't move, and I know that. And so I can like stop and stare at it for a second and go, okay, that animal's not moving, it's not blinking, it's not breathing, it's not real. And
Got
then
it.
the next thing I know, I'm walking by, oh, that's a tree stump or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But I didn't have very many like real animal encounters besides a lot of deer. There are tons of deer out there. I
Hmm.
didn't actually see a real bear along the JMT at all. Um, and my favorite animal encounter, I think ever, happened out there. It was like, again, like somewhere around 1 or 2 a.m. And I was laying down to take a nap. And so I like set up my bivy and I crawl in, and I keep my headlamp on so that I can just like wake up and turn it on and sit up and go. And, I have my headlamp on, and I get all comfortable, and I hear a stick break, and I'm like,
Hmm.
what the heck was that? So I like sit
Hmm.
up, I turn my headlamp on, and I'm looking around. I'm like, I don't see anything. I don't see eyes staring at me from anywhere. Like it's probably not a large animal. Okay, well, then like lay back down, close my eyes, some like sticks hit me in the face. And I was like, what the heck? And I turn on my headlamp and look directly up the tree that I was laying at the bottom of. And there's a flying squirrel like staring at me. And it just like chitters and like screams at me, it like yells at me and then takes off running. And I was like, oh my
No.
God, a flying squirrel. Like I knew flying squirrels existed in the Sierra, but I never thought I'd ever see one. And so
I
I was like, I was so happy. I was like, I couldn't sleep for a little while after that. I was like, just like, I want to see him again. It was
It's a
really
great
cool.
sign. That's a
Yeah.
great sign, I would say. I almost thought that they were fake, kind of like jackalopes or something.
I know everybody that I tell, I'm like, I saw a flying squirrel. They're like, no, there's no way. I'm like, no, I know it was a flying squirrel. It had the skin like flaps on its legs. I could see it. It was,
I mean,
very
let's
cute.
be honest, with all of your hallucinations, it could, I don't know about the credibility with this. I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, that's fair, but it did make lots of noise at me. It was very angry. It was a very angry squirrel.
That is hilarious. That is hilarious. Listeners, let me ask you this. Have you ever left a piece of really important gear behind on one of your trips? Or have you been so scattered with where you put your notes for your trips that you kind of forgot a critical piece of information because it was something that you wrote down on a notepad that you didn't bring with you? I have a solution for you, and it's completely free. It's my free Notion outdoor hiking and adventure trip planner. So go in the show notes below, grab it for yourself. It's completely free, and keep building. We'll see you later. All right, we'll pretend that we didn't just have to rejoin a Zoom link here.
Yeah, commercial break. It's fine.
Actually, perfect. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we got flying squirrels. We got the John Muir Trail. Now, one thing that you sent me and that I was kind of researching was this Death Valley Crossing. And it sounds like this is something that you attempted twice and failed both times on this. Now,
Yes.
that is got to be something that, because oftentimes we do something and we're like, if we fail it the first time, okay, yes, I'm going to crush it the second time. And then you feel good about it, right?
Uh-huh.
But this was a double hitter. So tell me a little bit, first of all, like what is this? Kind of set up the scene maybe of like what this kind of challenge was, and then what were your thoughts kind of coming out of the second time you attempted it?
Yeah. So everybody knows of Death Valley, right? It's like the hottest place on earth. It's 200 and something feet below sea level. It's a massive national park, and it's fairly desolate. Like it's a desert, and it's a very hot desert. It's a very dry desert. Because of that, there's no water along like in Death Valley unless you are, like at the resort or, at one of the water fill stations along the roadsides or something like that. There's no like natural drinkable source of water in Death Valley. The Death Valley Crossing is a route that goes from the northernmost point of Death Valley to the southernmost point. So it's about 165 miles long. It's all off trail. So very route findy. You start, actually, Death Valley is surrounded by pretty big peaks. I mean, Telescope Peak is like 11,000 feet. And then Dante's View is like 9,000 feet, I think. And in the north, the mountains that you start right around 6,000 feet of elevation. And then you drop all the way down into Badwater Basin. But the thing that makes the route so challenging is that it is like the style behind it is to do it unsupported. That's the way the route was developed, was to do it unsupported, which means you don't drop any caches ahead of time. So like you don't like create little, aid stations or anything like that for yourself ahead of time. You don't get support from other people. So nobody is there to like resupply you. And it's all off trail. And so because of that, you can't stash water along the route. And so you're carrying all of your water for 160 miles of off trail travel through a
Whoa.
desert.
Whoa.
That's, yeah, it is,
Whoa.
it's insane. Which I think is one of the reasons that I'm so drawn to it. The first, like when I first came across this route on the FKT website, I was like, that is the one. I want to do this so bad. And which maybe that's stupid. I'm not really sure, but like it's created such a challenge for me that I can't give it up. So the first time I attempted the route was, gosh, I don't remember what year it was, like December 2019, I think. I don't quite remember. So I gave it a try. I carried 15 liters of water. And so that's like, what, 33 pounds of water,
Of just water.
just water.
Just water, folks.
And like water carries different from other gear. It's like, I just haven't found a way to carry that much water very well in my backpack. Like I need some kind of like cylindrical water carrying that just like goes down the center of my backpack to like balance out everything, because otherwise the water is just like sitting in the bottom. And even when you put it on top of something, it like creates this weird imbalance that's really hard to carry.
Interesting. It's almost like having like a wet blanket, like a really super heavy wet blanket on you. We always that was the analogy we would have in Jiu Jitsu of really good Jiu Jitsu people. When you grapple with them, they felt like when they would grapple you, wrestle with them, they were like a wet blanket. You couldn't push them off. Like they were just like, and I kind of envision that possibly with some of the water that you're carrying. How do you even carry 15 liters of water? What are you putting that in?
So I have, they're called dromedary bags. Or droms. And so they're like 10-liter bags of water, that have like a pour spout. We use them when we're guiding mountaineering, to like store water in so that like a large volume of water doesn't freeze as much as like, or as hard as like, or as easily as like a small volume of water. So when you like keep your water stash in a large volume, it doesn't freeze as easily.
Which there was no issues of that in Death Valley.
No, no.
Yeah.
Well, and like I attempted this in the winter time, so both times. So I'm not like in the height of the summer when it's 120 degrees out. It's like more like 70 degrees outside, 70 to 80. But it gets super cold at night in some parts of Death Valley. And so, my first attempt carried 15 liters of water. I didn't anticipate how much water I was actually going to need to drink during that one. And I got about 100 miles into the effort. And I'm like, wow, my backpack is feeling kind of light now. And like check my water supply, I have 4 liters left with 65-ish miles to go. I was like, there's no way. There's absolutely no way that I'm going to be able to do 65 miles in the desert with 4 liters of water. Like that's just stupid. So I bailed on that one.
Good choice.
Yeah, I feel like that was the wise choice. It was a hard choice to make because after 100 miles and carrying 15 liters of water for, starting with 15 liters of water, and it wears on you. And the first part, it's all off trail. So you're not just like mindlessly following a trail. Like your mind is on, like you have to be on your toes on top of everything, route finding, all of that. Right. And like Death Valley, it seems like it's just flat, but it is like this network of washes and rocky piles and sand dunes. And so you're navigating through all of these washes and like pretty gnarly hills that you're trying to find your way through, up and over. And it's really unstable terrain and it's really hard to navigate. And so it's like, you have to be on your game the whole entire time. And, after 100 miles and 4 liters left, I was like, okay, we're done. We are done. And so I went back the next year and I was like, all right, this is it. I'm carrying 20 liters of water. I'm
Mhm.
not going to, and if it takes me an extra day or like, an extra half a day because I'm carrying a little bit more water, so be it. Like I'm gonna do this thing. And so like much cooler temps, it was kind of overcast. I was like, this is great. I'm not going to drink as much water. I still have 20 liters. Like this is going to be awesome. And if I get close to the end, I can just dump some water out and like jog it in. Like I felt like I had this great plan. And I got into after 2 nights out there, I was in day 3, and I saw a storm coming in and was like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't have rain gear. um, and it just suddenly starts pouring rain
Ooh.
on me.
And it's cold
And
now because it's at
it
night.
got cold and I didn't have rain gear.
Yeah.
I did have a flimsy, like, I mean, it was like saran wrap, thin kind of like uh, cloak, sort of like plastic cloak as a
Interesting.
just in case. But
Interesting.
I didn't actually think that it was going to rain that much in Death Valley.
Right.
But it was like torrential downpour. I mean, for hours. And I was like, this sucks. And so I kind of hunkered down and tried to stay out of the rain as much as possible, because of course that was in the evening and I was going to be going into a very cold night. And so I was like, I have to try to stay as dry as possible. And ended up soaked anyway. I had a bivy sack with me that I thought was waterproof, and it was not at all waterproof. And so I was like in that for a while, and then I noticed that everything was soaked, and I was like, "Oh, great, this isn't good." And so I just like I I think what I ended up doing, I hunkered down underneath this piece of plastic, and I like put my feet inside. I have a hyperlight backpack that's like
Yep.
pretty waterproof
Yeah.
ish. And so I put my feet inside that
Nice.
and was like, okay, this is how we're going to get through. But it was still like I was soaked, everything was soaked. And I was like, well, let's see if I can warm up by walking. But by the time I started moving again, my muscles had locked up, my
Yeah.
hips, my feet
Yeah.
were like super swollen. And trying to walk in that mud was impossible. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
mud just like is the kind of mud that like cakes on and then just like gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And then it was also super slippery. So I was like sliding around with this extra like pounds on my feet with this
Mm-hmm.
super heavy backpack. And I was like,
Right.
I literally cannot do this. Like it's taking
Right.
me 2 hours to go a mile. Like
Right.
there's no way. And so I made the decision to bail out on that. I was like maybe 75 miles or 80 miles
Mm-hmm.
into it. And I knew that the next section coming up was going to be really, really rough, because there's like a salt spring over there on that side of the valley that you have to kind of route find through and walk through, and it's super muddy anyway. And then after a big rain, that was just going to be way worse. And by the time you get to that point, it's like bailing out is almost impossible.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I was like, okay, I have to make
Yeah.
another really hard decision to bail out on this. I dumped all my water out except for a liter, and I walked out 3 miles to a spot where I could get picked up.
So, okay. So the first one, it's kind of you're bad, right? It was, hey, I
Yeah, it
didn't
was a
bring
learning
enough. I
experience.
didn't bring really enough water, and so I'm gonna come back with the second time. I'm gonna bring 5 more,
Yep.
which would make sense because then you get to that last point, you got like 9 because you had 4 before, so now you have 9
Yeah.
liters. Yes, that would be perfect. Unfortunately, the second time you go, now the weather takes a turn and it starts raining in Death Valley.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so you said you're talking about the saran wrap type stuff. Did that work at
I mean,
all?
yeah, it was just like it was like an emergency rain poncho kind of, but it
Got
was
it.
like so thin. It was like saran wrap. It would
Yeah.
just tear like really easily. I couldn't think of the word poncho. So I was like, oh, what do you call that?
Yeah.
tarp. But yeah, it was just like a little plastic emergency poncho that you buy at like a gas station.
I know
Um,
exactly what you're talking about. Yep,
yeah,
I've had one.
I threw it in last minute because I checked the weather and it was like, oh, there's a slight chance of rain, and I was like,
Right.
oh, it's not going to rain in Death Valley.
I know.
Um, but the thing about Death Valley is when it does rain, it pours and
Yeah.
it floods.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and because this is such a challenging route for you, I'm guessing you're going to be planning on doing it again soon.
I would love to go back. I actually was planning on, I mean, this is not an announcement, but I'd love to go back in February this year, like so in like
Oh,
a
soon.
month.
Yeah.
And yeah, the thing is if you wait beyond February, it gets too hot. Um, and it's just really hard because of the heat.
Yeah.
February is great, usually in the beginning of February because the weather is decent. Like it's not super hot during the day, it's not super cold at night, it's starting to warm up a little bit.
Yeah.
But right now, because of like there were some crazy floods in August, I think, in Death Valley that like wiped out a bunch of roads. And so one of the access roads to get to the start is closed.
Hmm.
And that access road is actually, it kind of parallels the route for a ways.
Mhm.
And it's a really great way to bail out if you need to, because
Yeah.
somebody can usually like
Yeah.
drive in and pick you up. But because that road is closed, um, like bailing out in the first 80-ish miles is almost impossible.
Mhm.
Like you have to walk yourself out. And so
Wow.
I'm kind of like, do I want to take that kind of a risk? I
Yes.
mean, I'd love to do it, but that road is not set to open um, anytime soon. And so
Huh.
I'm gonna kind of like that's a risk I need to consider and think about and make a decision on. And not only that, like with that road being closed, there's fewer people going out there, which means that the wildlife are going to be like way more active than usual in the valley. Because like where people tread, like where people go a lot,
Yeah.
there's usually like less wildlife.
Right. Right.
And there's actually in Death Valley, there's a lot of wildlife, and I've seen packs of like 15 coyotes. And
Yeah.
typically, I'm not afraid of coyotes, but like when you get a whole pack mentality, it's a
Sure.
little
That's
scary.
creepy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then I have seen mountain lion tracks in Death Valley, and especially at the start in the northernmost point in this area called Last Chance Canyon, I've seen
Yeah.
tons of mountain lion tracks in there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I'm not sure with the lack of people and the road
Yeah.
closed.
Yeah.
Like if I want to take the risk. We'll see.
Yes. Well, maybe it's a future plan in a couple of years or something like
Oh
that.
man.
I'm sure you have a lot of other plans that you want to do as well. So,
Yes, but Death Valley is that the Death Valley crossing is one of those that has just been following me a lot
yeah.
for like
Yeah.
years. It's been years.
Well,
So
I
I'd love to get that one done.
I I have faith in you. I know you're going to complete it. With everything that we just talked about. I mean, when I was doing research too, you have something like 39 FKTs, something like that.
I
So,
have 57.
oh, okay. So this was an old article. It was in 21, I think, or 20.
Yeah.
And okay, so folks, you hear it there. This is the FKT Queen. I love it. This is so cool. This is so cool. So I asked some of my peeps on Instagram to give me some questions for you. And I did it
Yeah.
quite late though. So I'm hoping that we got some questions because I only did it within like the last hour because I just wasn't thinking, of course. So let's take a look. We got a live version here. Okay. We got from Becca. She lives in Oregon. I know her.
Hi, Becca.
Yeah. She's like, how okay, so this is kind of like a training one.
Oh boy.
Knees. How to keep my damn knees in shape for big miles, especially on the downhills. This is a very common question that I get
Yeah.
frequently too as a trail runner. Yeah.
Yeah, knees, I know knees can be challenging for a lot of people. I think I was blessed with some pretty resilient knees because I
Uh-huh.
haven't actually had knee
Right.
problems. Um, except this last summer, I was wearing some shoes that I think didn't really work well for me, and I was doing a lot of downhill and ended up with some like patellar tendonitis type stuff.
I did
Um,
too. I
it's
had that
annoying,
this
isn't
year too. It
it?
sucked. It
So
literally like I just got rid of it. Like the last like month I haven't felt it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Super annoying. I was like, is this what people with knee problems like, is this
right.
this is awful. But I also, so I do train for that too. I
Right.
train to try and keep my knees healthy. And it's
100%.
something, especially after having that tendonitis issue, my trainer and I started working in exercises specifically for knees. And I don't know, have you seen the guy on Instagram, knees over toes guy?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I know Rogan interviewed him once or something like that. That's where I've
Yeah.
heard of him. Yeah.
So there's this whole idea that like when you're working out, doing lunges and squats and stuff like that, that you're not supposed to let your knees go over your toes. But the thing is like in any functional, like everyday situation, like your knees go over your toes all the time. Like when you're squatting down to pick something up, when you're like, it's very natural for that to
Right.
happen.
Right.
And so to not work the muscles through that kind of range of motion, I think is a poor choice. And so
Yeah.
my trainer and I, and actually his name is, my trainer's Mikey. I think you've talked to him
Yeah, I just
actually
talked to him
with,
last week.
yeah,
That's
outdoor adventure training. He's
right.
amazing. And he worked some like very specific knee exercises into my program. And so I do exercises like certain kinds of lunges where I purposely put my knees over my toes and work through that range of motion. Um, and some of the movements are very small because like if you do have unstable knees, it can be hard on them. But I've noticed like over time, I started some of these movements with zero weight. So like no dumbbells, no barbells, nothing, just body weight. And now, I'm working up to like, I'm holding 40 pounds while I'm working through these movements. And I can feel a difference in the strength in my knees and stability. And so working there, like, I would highly recommend checking out Knees Over Toes guy and his movements and what he's got going on. If you're looking for a trainer, check out Mikey at
Mikey.
outdoor adventure training, because he can create, yeah, all sorts of programs that can help with knees if you have bad knees. But yeah, I mean, lunges, squats, backward step up. So a lot of people get up on like a step and they like step up and then like just kind of fall down. So like really intentional movements, control stepping up and control stepping down, even stepping backwards up onto a step, to like utilize your quads and your knees, and
Wow.
like
So
work
backward
those going
backward step
backwards.
up. So if I had a
Yeah.
step up behind me and then I stepped on,
Hmm.
you're literally talking about like that.
Yeah. Yeah. But like low, like you're not
Yeah.
doing,
Yeah, right.
you're not
Yeah.
doing 12, 24,
Yeah.
48
No.
inches.
No, no.
Yeah, it's like really low, like 4 inches.
Love
Um,
that.
yeah.
I love that. I I love it because I think a lot of runners are just not used to going to the gym and using weights and doing like leg movements and things like that, at least the ones that I know. And they're always the ones that are getting injured.
Yeah.
And there's a big, from what I've seen, there's a big correlation between people that are in the gym using weights and moving weights and not being as injured as frequently. And yeah, I don't know. I've seen it a lot in jujitsu, a lot of people like that, same thing. And they would always be getting hurt. I'm like, are you going to the gym? No, not going to the gym. Well, you can't. I mean, for me, it's like, it's thinking about like bulletproofing my body. I'm like
Yeah.
building this foundation that is going to be strong. And so when you're doing these huge efforts, it's not going to be an issue. The one thing I found, I trained really good for my 100. There was one exercise I never did or one area that I neglected. And that's what ended up just coming back to bite me at mile 80, and that was my tibia. So I never did any kind of like, you go, well, it would be plantar flexing like your ankle,
Hmm.
right? With like a band or something. Never did that. I did everything else. I did squats. I did all this uphill athlete
Yeah.
stuff, this and that, and this and this. Never did the tibia, and it just blew up both of them at like mile 80.
Oh man.
So painful. And so, going forward, that's something I'm now strengthening because everything else was fine. But
Yeah.
strengthen those, get in the gym, peeps. Get in the
Yeah.
gym.
It's so important. I mean,
It is.
like I think about it as, like you said, I'm bulletproofing, I'm
Yeah.
stabilizing, because I mean, when you're running, you're moving forward, right? And there's like a
Hmm.
very specific set of muscles that get involved with like that forward movement. And like you neglect everything else. And so all of the muscles that help support, even when they're like not the main muscles that are being used when you're running, like
Yeah.
it's really important to strengthen those so that you do have
Yes.
that support. And I found like through strength training, like even my strength and control on unstable surfaces, like I do a majority of my running on trail. My ankle, knee, hip, mobility and stability and all of that is like improved, and my running is improved. I
Yes.
feel like things move more like a machine, like they're supposed to. Like if
Yes.
everything starts working together a little bit better. And
Yes.
yeah, it's just I think it's so important. And you talk to um any coach, running coach, and they're gonna tell like, yes, strength training is important.
100%.
Um, but it's
Yeah.
it's hard to implement when you spend hours and hours and hours running.
Yeah. So, and it's tough because at first you're going to be super sore, especially if you're not used to
Oh
weightlifting, and then you're going
yeah.
to go try to run and your legs feel like lead. So,
Yep.
but there is a long-term consequence from that, which is a good consequence, just like you're saying. I like to think of it as a multivitamin for my body. Lifting is literally like a multivitamin for my body. I know my CPA, actually, my accountant, actually is a big runner, and he's an older guy, and he said, oh yeah, I've cut down significantly my 50K times, my 50 miler times by literally just strength training the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to ignore it. So
I believe it.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and like even though you're not using your arms and upper back and like
Right. Yep.
stomach, like core, like they're not main muscles involved in running, that stability and strength is so helpful. Like you notice like your your shoulders and your upper body, like you have better movement in your core, like everything just like works together better when you
Yes.
actually like strengthen
Yes.
everything. But
Yes. Yes. And Becca, I'm not picking on you, by the way. You probably still go to the gym. People injure their knees all their time, though. I mean, that is a gnarly part of your body that if
yeah,
it's injured when you were
especially
young or something and it comes back
yeah,
to bite you.
yep,
So, yeah.
pounding down hills, that kind of a
Oh,
thing. Yeah, can be
yes.
really hard on your knees.
Yes. Yes. We have one from Wissy22. What is your go-to trail running shoe?
My go-to trail running shoe. Oh my gosh. So I am not I don't have like a specific shoe that I wear for everything.
Yeah.
I wear lots of different shoes. I try lots of different shoes. Um, the shoe that I keep going back to over and over again, just because it's a great all around kind of shoe, is the Ultra Lone Peaks.
Hmm.
Um, so I did the John Muir Trail in the Ultra Olympus, which I
Yeah.
really
Not a
liked
fan.
those.
I'm not a fan.
No,
No.
I did like the cushion for that kind of thing, and I was doing mostly walking,
Yeah.
um, and so my feet were fairly happy in the Olympus, but I like the Lone Peaks as kind of an all around shoe. If I'm doing something more like technical,
Yeah.
like scree mountainous, like scree, talus, scrambling, anything like that, I tend to go more towards like a Solomon speed cross type shoe. They're like really aggressive. They're really grippy. Um, they're like not as wide in the toe box as like an ultra shoe.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I have more control if I'm on technical terrain.
Yeah.
I also really like the grippiness for steep or like rock.
Yeah.
So yeah. Um, I've dabbled in Hokas a bit. I never found a Hoka that like
Yeah.
was perfect. Um,
They
I
look
know
like
a lot of
clown
people love
shoes.
them. They're super comfy, but for running, for me, they just don't
Yeah.
work super well.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
everybody's different, right? And played around a little bit with the Craft shoes, which Craft has like a carbon plate in some of their trail runners, and they definitely like make you feel fast and responsive. And they have like some great grip, but I
Yeah.
really like a lot of ground feel when I'm running.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons that I really like the ultras and especially the
Yeah.
Lone Peaks, because they have enough padding to like make my feet happy, but then enough ground feel that I feel like I'm still kind of connected to the earth.
Yeah, and they got some good traction, good lugs on them. I
Yeah.
feel like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I would say, I guess maybe that's my go-to.
Yeah, I use the Timps for a little bit, but there's just not as much grip on the Timps as there is on the Lone Peaks.
Yeah.
And we were doing some scrambling in the Wasatch, and I was wearing those Timps, and it wasn't fun.
Yeah.
It was scary. Like,
Yeah,
it
I've
was scary.
I've gone through a few pairs of Temps too, and I don't love the grip as much, and I think they have a little bit more padding, so like
Yeah,
maybe not as responsive.
right, right, right. Well, cool. There's a few other questions, but I don't want to take up your time anymore. This was on. I just got my little 10-minute thing again. But I just want to say, Ashley, you have been amazing. You've done some quite amazing stuff. We haven't even really like dug into like most of like anything that you've done. I mean, this is only like we talked about 2 FKTs out of 57, you said?
57. We didn't even talk about Bhutan.
We don't even have baton. Yeah. So I think we'll probably have to put a comma in this and make it for another podcast down the line. I would love to hear more about all of your FKTs and your adventures. And hey, maybe you decided to go and do your do your
Yeah,
Death Valley one.
maybe next time Death Valley will be done, we'll have that to talk about.
Yes, yes. So I super appreciate it. Is there anything you want to plug for yourself, guiding or anything like that? Or
Oh man, I'm always really bad at this part. I feel like I should be better at it, but I mean, I do have some pretty awesome sponsors like Gnarly
yes,
Nutrition. I really love Sawyer water filters, like some
yes.
awesome people, awesome companies doing really great stuff for the world. But yeah, I have a podcast called Women of the Wild. And I told you earlier that I haven't actually put out a new podcast in quite some time, but I do have like 20, I think 20 episodes that
Awesome.
have a lot of value and really cool stuff with really cool people. So yeah, Women of the Wild .org, O-R-G
And look,
is
I
the
can
website.
send you this copy of this episode. You can put it up there too.
Oh,
Yeah. So then,
there we go. That's a good
yeah,
idea.
I'll
I
just
like
send
it.
you that over Google Drive or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, so gosh dang it. Every time my mind goes blank on these podcasts sometimes. I always have like something that I'm going to say afterwards and then I forget what I'm going to freaking say. Anyway, I don't know.
That's
It's
okay.
been a great time talking with you, and
It's been
I
awesome.
super appreciate you coming on. What people don't know is that we struggled for about 15 minutes before this podcast to even hear each other. And sorry for the video quality. The next podcast I'll have the camera up, and it just wasn't working. And Ashley told me what I was doing wrong, so I think I figured it out for next time. So
Yep.
I
You got this.
appreciate
I believe in
you.
you.
Yes. Yes. I appreciate you. You're an outstanding person. And oh, That was it. Instagram. What's your Instagram handle?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, speaking of play, see, I am really bad at this. I'm really bad at like marketing myself. Um, so my Instagram, I am pretty active on Instagram. My Instagram is Ashley.Winchester,
Mhm.
and Ashley is spelled without an E. So it's ASHLY
Right.
dot Winchester, like Winchester rifles.
Yeah.
Um,
Right on.
and yeah, so I'm pretty responsive. If anybody wants to like reach out, say hi, ask
Yeah.
questions, I'm I'm there.
Yeah. Quick story before we leave. The I saw you had commented on one of my Instagram posts one time, and I was like, oh, "Is that Ashley Winchester that did the JMT FKT? Really?" And I was like, "Oh, sweet!" And so it was, and I was like, "I'm definitely following her back." That was
Oh,
really
please.
cool. I forget which post it was, but some one of my
uh,
stupid posts, that I do, and so anyway, I
no,
appreciate
they're fun.
that, and we'll get you back on soon, probably this
Yeah,
year, if that's
that'd
cool.
be great.
Yeah,
I'd love
yeah.
it. This
So
was fun.
awesome. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.